It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me. Craig, shut up.
Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump.
So it's Reality Check with Craig Price. I am Craig Price, and this week, Mike Domitrz with the Date Safe Project is here to talk about teen dating. I hope you're all doing well. Sit back and try to relax because today's topic, it's going to get a little awkward. I'm going to be talking more about teen dating and sex with you, mostly complete strangers, than I have with my own parents in my entire 40 years of existence. Teen dating is scary, and not just for the participants. I know we have a lot of parents with kids in this age range where it's starting to become a necessity to talk about sex and dating, and not just a luxury or a preemptive thing. Because I'll be honest, I'm glad I don't have teens. I can't imagine what it's like now. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s when AIDS and HIV were just starting, and they didn't know what it really could do or how you really got it. So you were pretty much told if you had sex, you could die. Now we know what we can do to prevent it. It's all about condoms. So kids, what they're doing now is they're getting caught sexting each other. They're sending pictures of themselves naked to one another. Oh no, it's not just a Brett Favre thing. Kids are doing it too. These are all kinds of things that my parents didn't have to even think about. But before we get into the depths of teen dating and sex, let's remind some of the new listeners that you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. You can head over to our website, realitycheckpodcast.com, where you can search by topic or guest. We have the Twitter account, @RealityCheckPod, which has a cool list made just of guests, so you can follow all the tweets past guests are sending out, giving you more access and information than you could possibly want. And finally, if you like the show, you think it's worth something, let people know. Leave a review on iTunes. Maybe just click 5 stars if you don't really want to think about a full review. Just a 5-star click, boom, you're done. You can share specific episodes by using the share options on the website. Whatever you need to do to get the word out, please, I would certainly appreciate it. I appreciate all the support we've gotten already, but, I certainly wouldn't mind a tiny little bit more. Yeah, okay, I'm a little greedy that way, okay? But I think I've adequately shielded enough so we can get to today's guest, Mike Domitrz. Teen dating is a touchy subject for a lot of parents, and I think in this society nowadays, parents are even worse at it than before because they're kind of avoiding the topic. They want to be more friends than parents. So how are some of the ways we can approach our teen kids as parents and actually do our job as parents, talking about, how you should date properly and things like that?
Well, the key is really giving them things they can actually do. Most parents make the mistake of telling their kids what not to do when it comes to dating intimacy. And I don't care what age you are, most people don't like being told what not to do. And so it tends to turn off the listener, whether that's a teenager, younger, or older, when it comes to dating intimacy. So one of the first things parents have to realize is, what am I going to teach my kids how to do when it comes to dating and intimacy? What are the proper ways to do things? And how do I do that without being sexist or putting them in some old gender role that used to exist?
So, when do you start doing that? Because it's just, I think people are always worried about doing it too early. And then but when they finally do it, it's too late.
Correct. Typically, if you're worried about having the conversation because they're too young, it usually means you need to have it. You're just worried about having the conversation the wrong way. And so you're afraid you're going to somehow intrigue them into more interest than they currently have. Here's the facts. If you mention something that they're not even thinking of right now, they're going to be grossed out. They're not going to go, ooh, sounds cool, unless they're already in that ooh, sounds cool stage. So then they're at a point where you better be talking about some details. The key is that you're age appropriate. You're not going to tell a 4-year-old the same thing you're going to tell a 14-year-old, but be age appropriate. You're going to talk to a 4-year-old about their bodies and their boundaries, and you're going to talk to a 14-year-old about theirs and their partners. And so but the 4-year-old, you might talk about boundaries with your friends. But you're going to talk about it on an intimate level with a 14-year-old. And with a 4-year-old, you might say, but that's not something you do. So it really depends on age appropriateness, and that's the key.
And I'm here with Mike Domitrz of the Date Safe Project. And leading into the next question, because I know a lot of this comes mostly from dads, where they go, she's not going to date till she's 21, which means that she's going to start dating at 14, and then you're going to be 7 years behind when you finally talk to them.
Yeah, not only that, but she's going to think she can't ever talk to you about anything. So her sources will become her peers, which is scary stuff, and or the internet, which is especially scary information, especially when it comes to sex and dating. You're going to find porn being her source of education. And that's common.
And I was going to say that because, growing up, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. Porn was not really an issue. It was more like every couple months, if you and your buddies were walking to school, you found a moldy, wet magazine that it was shredded and tattered, and it was like a little gold mine of sex for 3 months. You couldn't really tell what was going on, where now they can go online and look up literally anything. And there are some disturbing things on the internet. So how can you protect your kids from that besides just telling them to never get on the internet, which means that they're definitely going to get on the internet?
Correct. So what we always tell parents is don't focus on so much protecting. Instead, think of the word preparing. And there's a huge difference in those beliefs. Protecting, you lie to yourself and say, I can stop these things from happening, which is a complete lie. You can't. You can't control what's going to happen when your child goes to that friend's house on Friday night that you think is totally safe, but somebody's over there hitting on your child. You can't control what's going to happen when they're at a friend's house and they go on the internet. Even though you have control over your house's internet, you don't have control over the others. Or when they're at the mall and they pull up the internet on their friend's phone and pull up this information. So preparing becomes the key word. And that's why you have to teach your kids how to. You have to prepare when you see these images, you're going to see them. So when you see these images, here's how you want to understand what you're actually looking at. For instance, if it's porn, you're looking at potentially somebody who was sold into the sex industry. And that person's like a slave you're looking at. They, at the age of 13, were stolen from their family or conned away from their family, and they're being forced into the situations through drugs and other situations. Does that make that so attractive? Or how about the fact, and they'll say, well, what if it's not? What if they chose to do that? Okay. Is that the body you expect on your first date to look at? Because if that's the standard you set for yourself, what's going to happen is, I used to tell parents this, I'll use an example of a heterosexual couple, a male and a female. 16-year-old boy, and he is looking at porn. Sees the same imagery of females on porn consistently, same kind of body figure. Now he goes on his first date, and maybe several dates in, whatever it happens, he gets to see the actual female body of his partner. Now, had he never seen the porn, the moment he saw nudity of his partner, it would have been like, cha-ching, woo, and I don't mean cha-ching financially, I mean like, woo, this is an awesome, incredible moment. This is unbelievable. His mind would just be going off the charts excited, right?
I think we all know what cha-ching means.
Yes. But because he saw porn first, he looks at the same female body now and says, oh, that's all? And actually compares her body to the imagery he's learned in porn. That is really, really sad stuff. And when people say there's no damage being done when kids look, that's damaging. That means their brain has now been taught this is the only acceptable viewpoint, which isn't a normal, healthy body often. And so that's sad. They lose appreciation. And by the way, that could have been true of any gender, right? We could have used an example of a male looking at a male, because that's porn too. We could have looked at a female looking at a female and used the exact same example. It would still be sad that they'd have this completely unrealistic, unhealthy view of the human body. And that's one quick example of the impact porn can have. So parents have to be able to say that to their child. If you're going to look at this, is this what you expect on your first date? Do you understand the damage that can do to having those moments? So here's how to understand the human body. And now you go into what the human body is like and how to appreciate it and value it.
Is this where we get the proliferation of, self-made sex tapes? I mean, you never would have thought 30 years ago of making a sex tape, and if you did, it was took a lot of equipment, and it was, now all they need is an iPhone propped up.
Well, the sex tape industry has grown for one reason, and it's called lack of self-esteem, especially in a culture where sexual bodies are being valued. And so you think I can gain self-esteem by somehow having somebody like me for my sexual being over anything else. So if I make this sex tape, you might be impressed by that. Therefore, you'll be impressed by me, which is a really messed up concept. Because if you ask people and say, do you think higher of that person? Almost nobody says yes. What they tend to say is, no, I might want to watch the video, but I do look down on the person I'm watching, which is pretty messed up. That's a whole other conversation we could have that tells you how messed up the porn concept is, right? You look down on the person you're enjoying looking at. But it's a messed up concept of I'm going to seek self-esteem somewhere, and if that's the only place I think I can get it, I'm going to go there. And you're not actually gaining self-esteem. You're gaining, sort of that infamy versus actual fame or credibility or something you've done with your life.
Well, let's give the listeners a baseline, because besides the fact of the porn being everywhere, I think one of the big issues is that parents just don't understand what is happening in the culture of the youth, and it's almost always they find out in the worst possible ways. So give us just a few ideas. You don't have to get I'm sure there's hundreds and thousands of how things are different now in the 21st century versus just in the 90s or in the 80s.
Well, actually, I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to have parents stop and think about how much things are the same. The more parents think things are different, the less they can connect with their child. Because parents make the mistake of going, wow, times are so different now. I can't even understand what they're going through. Yeah, you can. Ready, parents? Here we go. Were you nervous on your first date? Yes. Were you nervous when you asked somebody out for the first time? Yes. When you started kissing somebody for the first time, were you wondering what was going to happen next and when? Yes. Did you, when their hand touched your back, were you wondering if they were going to go under your shirt or above your shirt, depending on what gender you were? Yes. All these things are still true today. Your kids are having all those feelings. Hey, mom or dad, when you were a freshman in high school, do you remember that the guys are trying to look across the room at the girls facing them to see if they were wearing short skirts or not? Yes, people were doing that when we were parents. Are they doing that today? Yes. So what we have to first understand is that today's teenagers are horny, just like our parents' generation, their parents' generation was. We can't act like they're different. It's the direct opposite. They're the same in many ways. It's just they have one huge, massive difference, and that is the availability for them to get information that often is damaging. And that's the internet. That's the media. It wasn't readily available like it is now. Craig, you said earlier, you found that one magazine once in a while. And I always tell parents, if you didn't have a friend whose dad had those magazines, you didn't see it, like you just said. You went to one resource, and everybody knew what the resource was. It was National Geographic.
Yeah, that was definitely different than in my neighborhood, but yeah.
That's exactly was. But you could see topless tribal women, and so that was a big deal if you didn't have those other magazines. And when you bring that up, parents totally laugh because they go, yep, especially dads, I remember that. But that's the difference, is the availability of information. And so it's not that parents today are worse at this than parents of the past. It's that parents of today have to deal with competition. They used to think, I can keep this information from my child. And nowadays, there's no way you can have that belief system. So their parents would not tell them anything, thinking, well, they're not going to deal with this if I don't tell them. Well, nowadays, you can't even try to lie to yourself and say, if I keep my kids from this, they won't have to deal with it. It's too blatant of a lie. You have to face reality.
So how can you approach the situation and teach them the right ways? Because I'll be honest, my sex talk from my parents was not even directed at me. It was, we dropped my brother off to college. We bring him into the dorms. He unpacked. We're getting ready to leave. We get in the car. He leans in, gives my mom a kiss on the cheek. She's crying because her baby's leaving. And right before my dad stepped on the gas, she said, I hope someone told you about condoms, and we drove away. So right. So I had to overhear my sex talk because they never approached the subject with me at all because they were, very rigid. They were very sweet people, but when it came to sex, they didn't talk about it. They just ignored it. And thankfully, I came from a progressive school where they taught it in school. Unfortunately, they used condoms in large summer squash. Right. It's like, really? That's a lot of pressure to put on people. But
that's right. But and a lot of schools don't ever do that. So you would have never had the information if that's the case. And what you went through, Craig, is normal. Parents don't want to talk about it. Still today, a lot of parents don't want to talk about it. So here's the first thing a parent wants to ask themselves. What do you really want for your child? Lifetime intimacy viewpoint. What do you really want for your child as they become adults? And almost every loving, caring parent is going to tell you something that nobody ever actually thinks about, which is I hope that when my child is a grown adult, that they have a healthy, intimate, passionate, happy life. That whoever they choose to be with, they have a wonderful experience of intimacy that is very positive and a positive impact throughout their life. Taking that as your starting point, how differently would you talk to teenagers about intimacy? For most people, it's a drastic viewpoint change. It shifts the whole paradigm because most parents come in from the opposite viewpoint. What do I not want my kids to get involved with? And that is a negative energy force versus what do I hope my child experiences as a grown adult experiencing intimacy? And if I don't give them the tools in their teenage years, what are the odds they're ever going to reach that adult who has that wonderful, positive, intimate life?
And I'm sure there's different approaches depending on the gender because while it does happen, it is rare. And it does happen. It is rare for women to sexually assault men, but it does happen. It definitely seems statistically that it's much more young men are assaulting women.
Well, males are the more common perpetrators, and no doubt about that. But we have a lot of males who are survivors. We have a lot of females who are survivors, regardless of who the perpetrators. And there are female perpetrators. Here's the thing, though. Actually talking to the genders about intimacy, one of the biggest mistakes parents can make is actually talking to them differently. Because what happens is you accidentally blame victims, right? And you say, well, how would that happen? Somebody might be thinking right now. Well, let's say that you say, well, I don't want my daughter to be sexually assaulted, so I'm going to talk to her about how she dresses. Well, what does your daughter actually hear you say? If you dress like this, you're asking for it, which is a horrific message for a parent to tell a child. And if they had said the same thing to both children, regardless of gender, you wouldn't have brought that up at all. You would have said, hey, you know what? I want you to always be with a partner who respects your boundaries. The moment you're on a date and you feel like a partner is pushing or coercing or wanting something that you don't want, and you state, hey, I'm not, and they don't respect whatever you state as your beliefs, call the date off. You deserve to be with somebody who's going to respect what you believe, what you stand for from day one. If you're going to touch your partner, you're going to give them a choice first. You're never going to assume. And by the way, whether you're my son or my daughter, I hope you would use your voice that way. I don't ever want you to think it's your partner's job to decide what happens with your body. It's your body. You want to own it. You want to own your voice. See, that takes out gender and allows you to have a strong person versus be a man. Or here's what it's like to be a man. Versus here's what a young lady does. No, how about be a good person? That's a much more wonderful thing to teach our kids.
Well, and the one thing I've seen, I don't have kids. It doesn't seem to be in the cards. It's not something we're looking to have. But from what I've seen with people, how they treat their kids and deal with other kids, it's always, oh, that would never happen with my kid. My son's wonderful, or my daughter she's a strong person and she would never allow this kind of thing to happen. So
let's pause on that one. Let's use that one as an example. My daughter is strong-minded. This could never happen to my daughter. First of all, you can be strong-minded in 90% of your life, but not a certain 10%. Every one of us knows that's true of our own personalities. Everybody listening right now, I bet you can all think of one area of your life you do not feel comfortable in. That if you were in a crowd, that's not the one thing you'd want to be leading or having the conversation on. That's true of all of us. So someone like myself in high school, I can look back and realize I was outspoken. I was theater. I would do the morning announcements, and they would be ridiculous, off the charts, insane. I would lead organizations. Didn't care. Had no fears in any of that category. But in the category of intimacy and partners, I did not have the confidence. And nobody could ever imagine that because they thought, what are the odds he doesn't have the confidence? Because it's a different component of life than the others are. And so all the rules change. And here's the thing. Everybody wants to feel wanted and attractive. That's human nature. So no matter how strong your child is, the idea that your child could be vulnerable to somebody making them feel that way are good odds. So you really want to talk to your child about how amazing they are, how wonderful, how special their body is, because you don't want the first person to be says that to them to be the first one who's ever said it to them, because that person's going to be somebody who's more likely to get your child maybe to do things that you're hoping your child's not doing yet, because you didn't say the things to them that this other person is willing to say.
And I think that leads into the peer pressure situation, because I feel that you can be the best parent in the world, but then you have to send your kids out into the world, and now you are at the mercy of not only other parenting, but just other kids and how they react. So the whole peer pressure situation, how can you defend peer pressure from or teach them how to properly avoid the pitfalls of peer pressure?
Well, and that's why it comes back to preparing versus protecting, because they are going to go out in that world and they're going to have to make the decisions on their own. And you as a parent can't blame yourself for their decision making. You have to realize you're giving them the tools. So here are the tools, for instance, when it comes to peer pressure. Are you telling your child what they should expect to hear? Right? And if you teach them those things, then when they hear them, it doesn't shock them. I'll give you an example. If you say to your child, look, if somebody is hoping that you're going to be intimate with them, you might notice that they're going to tell you how beautiful and amazing you are, anywhere from 30 seconds to 10 to 15 minutes before they seek intimacy with you. If you notice that this partner is suddenly giving you compliments more than ever before, and then they seek the intimacy, in your mind you should say, yep, that's sort of the system I knew they'd use. That's the technique they're taking. So you understand this is pretty standard protocol they're doing. And suddenly your kids might catch that, like a red alert. How come they didn't say those things an hour ago when they wanted no intimacy? Why didn't they just tell me I was beautiful just to tell me? Why didn't they tell me how incredible my eyes were just in the middle of dinner, regardless of ever wanting intimacy? And if I say no, will they still tell me I'm beautiful? If they ask me or they want something with me and I say no, I'm not ready for that, well, do they get defensive? Or do they say, you know what, you're so special, I'll wait? Are they consistent? And those are the kind of things you can give them tools what to look for, and especially if you say no and see how your date reacts. If they totally respect your choice, don't try to change your mind, don't try to come back and ask again 10, 15 minutes later. That's a cool moment.
Well,
find out.
Another thing that it seems like when the kids approach the parents and something has happened, something they didn't want has happened, parents, the first thing they do is get angry. Obviously, like someone did this to my child, or even worse, someone is accusing my child of doing this. Unfortunately, I think we've seen way too many parents defend guilty children of doing, guilty sons of doing things and saying that my kid would never do this. How can we approach if they approach us and they said, our daughter has come to us and has said this thing has happened, or my son is being accused of this? What is a way that we can approach it without having rage and emotion skew our actions properly? Absolutely.
We actually have a technique for this. It's called take a breath and say, okay. Just those two rules. I'm going to explain it in a moment. Here's why. Most parents out there have told their children, I'm here for you. Anything ever happens, I'm here for you. It's a common line. The problem is the kids don't believe it, because they once told you about a test they bombed and you flipped out. They once told you about something smaller they did and you really got ticked off. And so they believe in their heads they can't really tell you, because you will judge them, and that's what they fear the most. So what we have to actually do as parents is we have to reverse our behavior. Our behavior tends to be flip out, then calm down and go back and talk to our kids in a real conversation versus the flip out conversation. We need to reverse it. Your child delivers difficult news to you. Have in your mind an instant thought that you will first take a breath and say, okay, I'm glad you told me. If you do that, and I'll do it as a quick moment, you just use an example. Mom or dad, I've had sex. Okay, I'm glad you told us. You can't really flip out now, right? Because that you made yourself slow down. You made yourself take a breath. And by the way, okay, I'm glad you told me is always a true statement.
Right.
You're not saying it's okay they did it. You're saying, okay, you told me. I'm glad you told me. Which is, no matter what they were involved with as a parent, you want to know. So you're always going to be glad they told you. It doesn't mean you're going to be glad what happened, but you're going to be glad they told you. How else can you help them? I always tell kids, your parents' greatest fear, besides losing you, is the day you most need them, and you don't go to them as a parent. That is a parent's crushing to think you couldn't help your child in the most painful moment in life. So parents, we got to step up and say, okay, I'm glad you told me. Take that breath first, calm down, and let them know they've come to the right person here.
Well, my last question for you actually comes from the internet. Whenever I have a guest on, I post and you've answered some of them already. This one specifically was from a listener. And what they want to know is specifically from you, Mike, because this is what you do day in, day out. It's all you talk about. And you talk about, not just parenting tips. You can get real serious about assault and things like that. So this question is how do you, specifically, Mike, how do you deal with that side of your business, knowing what terrible things are happening to very vulnerable young women every night of the week? How do you deal with all this information that you're getting?
Well, the way we deal with the information is real simple. Where are the skills we can share with others to make a positive impact? And for everybody listening, that's really the way to view it as a parent too, or a caring aunt or uncle. With all these things going on in the world, with all this negative news, some people go, what can I really do? If there's just too much yeah, you can. You stop and you go, all right, with that news story, how could I talk with my child or my niece or my nephew? What conversation could I have with them to give them more skills? Not to tell them, I don't ever want to hear that you did that. No, I don't want that conversation. Who wants to hear that, right, as a teenager? But what information can you give me that helps me, that actually makes it easier for me as a teenager? That's the information that all of us want, and that's what we do. We get so much information, as you said, every day that we're sitting there going, all right, what can we do to help with that information? How can we make a positive impact with that information? And that's what we all want to do for the teenagers out there.
Well, there's no doubt you're making a positive impact, and you speak to universities and high schools all across the country. Where can people find you if they want to bring the Date Safe Project to them?
Well, the easiest way to do that is go to datesafeproject.org. That's, you're going to go on a date, you want to feel safe, and you don't want to feel like it's a project. Datesafeproject.org, and we actually have a whole section for parents in there. They can click into. There's free videos for parents to watch about having these conversations, and lots of great resources.
Well, Mike, you're doing amazing work, and for someone who doesn't have kids, I'm glad there are people like you out there telling other people's kids what they need to hear. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig.
I appreciate you being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me on. And yeah, as you made aware, whether people have kids or not, a lot of them are aunts and uncles, or they have kids in their life who they could help. And that's what we ask them to do. Get out there and just spread this message to those teens or even preteens that could use this little bit of difference to make a huge impact.
That's our show for this week. Once again, thanks to Mike for coming on to talk about a very uncomfortable but necessary subject, at least for me. If you have comments, questions, or guest suggestions, always looking for great guests like today's guest, Mike Domitrz. Anytime you have a great guest suggestion, email me at craig@speakercraigprice.com. Like the Facebook page to hear the podcast directly in your feed every week, or follow us on Twitter @RealityCheckPod. See you next week.